Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's Thursday with AARP Wisconsin. I am Amber Miller, your host. And of course, before we get to our really great guest, there are a couple announcements that I always like to make. Please make sure to visit the AARP Wisconsin website should you need information on upcoming virtual events, information about advocacy, COVID, caregiving. All of that information could be found at aarp.org/WI. You can also see that below. Community Connections, of course, launched about 2 years ago, right when the pandemic started. And there's a couple different things that you could do on the website. One is that you can create volunteer opportunities within your area. You can join volunteer opportunities. And then you can also look into the AARP Friendly Voice Initiative. This is something that you can request for yourself or for a loved one. It's free and you do not need to be an AARP member, and it's open to all ages. But as we know, sometimes it's just nice to hear a friendly voice on the other end. So you could put a request in for one of our AARP trained volunteers to give you a call. It could be a weekly call, a monthly call, and once again, it's free. So you could get additional information about this initiative at aarpcommunityconnections.org or by calling 1-888-281-0145. And even though we are still kind of living in a virtual world, we'd love for you to look at AARP Wisconsin as a place that you would like to volunteer. So if you're interested in getting additional information or to apply to be a volunteer, you can go to the website below, which is aarp.org/I-want. And then the number 2, volunteer. So I want to volunteer. So you can find the opportunities in there, additional information, and once again, the application. And once you fill out the application, you'll receive a phone call from one of the AARP Wisconsin staff members. Otherwise, you can also find volunteer information at the AARP Wisconsin website. So you might know or you might not know, but Women's History Month is a celebration of women's contributions to history, culture, and society, and has been observed annually in the month of March. So today we have 2 guests with us. So today we're joined by Dan Baisden with the City of Fort Wayne, and then also Kate Nelson, the Director of Sustainability with University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And both of them are going to talk a little bit more about the life and legacy of Jane Jacobs, who, if you're one of our viewers right now, this might be the first time you have heard of her. And also, feel free to post any questions or comments below if you're watching us on Facebook.com or YouTube, as we'll be getting to those questions a little bit later on in the show. So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you both being here. So Dan, I'm going to start with you, and thank you again for joining us. I heard through the grapevine, as I said before the show, that you're a pretty big Jan Jacobs fan. So I know you're going to share some insight with her about her for our audience, because once again, this might be the first time that they've heard about her. So if you could maybe share also a little bit about yourself, because you are coming to us outside the state of Wisconsin. So if you could talk a little bit about what you do in Fort Wayne.
Sure, thank you. I guess I'll start with that first. My name is Dan Baisden. I am the administrator of neighborhood planning and activation for the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so we write neighborhood plans, we work with neighborhoods, and we really work to encourage growth and connectivity between members of neighborhood associations. And so that's really kind of my background here with the city of Fort Wayne. I did a little bit of a stint in another state for a while, but I got to meet a few folks here from AARP Wisconsin through that process, and I'm really appreciative of that.
And I know you've been a guest here before. I think you were on our show last year. So if Dan looks familiar, he's been on our show before. So why don't we bring up your presentation, and I'll kind of just turn it over to you. And once again, if you're watching this live, if you have any questions, you could put them in the box below and we'll get to them. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm a huge fan of Jane Jacobs, as was stated. Jokingly, for a while, we've talked about there's a book club that I'm a part of, and we've talked about the only tattoo I may ever get is one of Jane Jacobs. So that tells you maybe how bit of a fan I am. But I'm going to just set the scene here. So this is in Boston in 1980. There's a developer by the name of James Rouse. It was called the Boston Great Cities Conference, and he appeared on stage alongside Jane Jacobs, and the subject of this conversation was whether cities should be developed with big visions or modest steps and incremental change. Rouse recalled the words of Daniel Burnham of Chicago, who said, "Make no little plans, for they have no magic to stir men's blood." And to that response, Jane followed up by saying, "Well, this is funny because big plans have never stirred women's blood. Women have always been willing to consider little plans." And so I want to start with that because I think what we can see here is Jane really took the way we look at place or cities and just changed how we view this and how we move forward with ideas and plans and building community. A little bit about Jane's history. She was born in 1916 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, by the name of Jane Butzner. During the Great Depression, though, Jane moved to Brooklyn with her sister. Looking for a job, she found the idea of riding the subway and getting off at just different stops each day. She would walk through the neighborhoods. She ended up landing a position as a secretary, but in the process of going from neighborhood to neighborhood, she just started familiarizing herself with the different sights and scenes and sounds and experiences she had in each place. Jane married an architect by the name of Robert Jacobs, and throughout the 1950s is where she really started to grow her role with members of the New York community. When Robert Moses, who is often considered the master builder, if you've read the book The Power Broker, and sometimes is often known for his time of urban renewal throughout the city of New York, well, he presented plans for the idea of a project called the Lower Manhattan Expressway. Jane was front and center among several protesters at the time trying to stop the project. Moses, of course, had several other lesser-known projects with Jacobs that Jacobs helped rally against, including the bisection of the Greenwich Village Washington Square Park by an extension of Fifth Avenue, and the condemnation and likely demolition of several citywide neighborhoods, including her own in West Village. Also in the 1950s, Jane worked for several publications as a writer and the editor-in-chief of a publication called America Illustrated, and then became the senior editor at Architectural Forum. In 1958, she wrote a widely read essay called Downtown is for People, which gained the Rockefeller Foundation's attention. And this all kind of set her up for her big, well-known book that most people recognize today, and that is The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and begins with the quote, "This book is an attack on current city planning and rebuilding." This is important because Jane was criticized by people in the profession as a housewife with no college degree. And a lot of people would often question, how could somebody with so little credentials be today considered the mother of what is good urbanism? So later on, Jane would write some very influential books, of course, Death and Life of Great American Cities, followed by The Economy of Cities and The Wealth of Nations, The Question of Separatism, Systems of Survival, The Nature of Economies, and Dark Age Ahead. Unfortunately, we lost Jane in 2006 at the age of 90 years old, but she sure left a lot of great things for us to consider. So on the next slide here, we have just a couple of things that she left with us. These are just some really good points for us to remember when it comes to building great place. The first one here is to generate diversity in the city. These conditions are indispensable. First, the space must perform more than one primary function, preferably two. And the idea behind that is when we think about our communities we build, oftentimes, if you're in a dense, traditional, older neighborhood, there's maybe a shop or a library or a school or something else in the neighborhood. So it's not just one simple use, but it's truly multiple uses where people can gather together. Maybe there's a park. But sometimes in modern suburban neighborhoods, it truly is house after house after house. And then you go to the next street and another row of houses, and sometimes they even look similar. So really, going back to that slide here, the space must perform more than one primary function. Most blocks must be short. The idea is that you're able to get from one space to the next without long, uninterrupted destination paths. The area must mingle buildings that vary in age and condition. This is super important. Her idea behind that was because during urban renewal, we would just destroy everything on a block and rebuild with brand new. So the idea here is to mix ages of buildings. And there must be sufficiently dense population of people. A lot of our denser communities have, sometimes 20, 30 houses, maybe on a block, maybe 10 to 15 houses. But our more modern suburban neighborhoods sometimes only have 2, 3, or 4 on a block. Even if there is a block, a lot of times it's on a cul-de-sac. To be effective at planning for neighborhoods, these are some really important points too. One must aim to foster lively and interesting streets. So when we think about streets, if we think about them purely for vehicle travel, just to get from point A to point B behind a steering wheel, we've failed. A street really is truly a place or a location for people to gather and enjoy, and for pedestrians to cross safely and freely, as well as having vehicles travel along the street. Also, a couple of other good points here is to make the fabric of streets as continuous a network as possible throughout the entire neighborhood. Use parks, squares, and public buildings as part of the street fabric. So how do we make them all connect and tie into one another? And then finally is to emphasize the functional identity of districts and neighborhoods. So this is how do you identify, instead of it just being maybe, I'm just going to make up a name here, Rockefeller Landing, is there an identity about the place? Maybe it's labeled around the school, or how's it connected to the school or the park? It's got to be more than just a name that a developer put on a sheet of paper when they submitted it with the Plan Commission. Jane Jacobs then has 4 ways that we can work today to improve our cities and towns. She wrote this in the 1960s, and it is still important to this very day. First is immigrants should receive great service, respectful amenities, and hassle-free permission to live their culture. She criticized New York City that when Puerto Rican residents moved to New York City, they had no place to roast their pig. And I know that sounds really maybe different for a lot of us to think about, but that's truly a point of culture that we have to respect. Develop community hearths and social infrastructure. This is places where people can gather, enjoy, build conversations, build relationships. Gentrification should only proceed with moderation. This is a thing that a lot of times Jane gets criticized for, is people think she was pro-gentrification or pro-displacement. But here what she's saying is we should not displace members of the community. Instead, it's okay to reinvest in our community in a positive way. And then finally, and this is probably her most important thing when it comes to building neighborhoods or really vibrant places, that's stability, equity, and sustainability are the seeds of great urban neighborhoods. She truly provides advice that rings true today. To ward off decay, neighborhoods should have all types of buildings, busy sidewalks, and reasons to go there when offices close. There's a couple big quotes here from her, and I think they're super important for us to live by to this very day. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are truly created by everybody. And I also like this next quote from her. Dull, inert cities, it is true, do contain the seeds of their own destruction, but lively, diverse, intense cities contain the seeds of their own regeneration. Simply put, Jane's idea about building community was start with the community, start with the people. If we're doing it from a closed room in a far off location and we're telling the community exactly what they need to survive, we have not done our job, and we've not done it. We've not done what we need to build a great place. And so that's truly Jane's idea of how do we build great communities, is from the bottom up.
Great, Dan. And what I'll do is I'm going to bring Kate up now to talk a little bit more about Jane's walk, and then I'm going to bring you both back. And there's some questions that were emailed to us ahead of time that I would love to chat with you about. So Dan, we'll put you in the virtual green room, and we'll bring you right back in just a little bit. Thank you so much. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
So I think Dan did an amazing job of just framing out how amazing Jane is, but you're going to talk a little bit more about the actual Jane's walk, which obviously was inspired by the amazing work of Jane. And what I love about Jane, and especially Dan's presentation and Jane's walk in general, it really coincides with the AARP livable communities, especially when we look at walkability and green space and making sure that a community is great for an 8-year-old or a 108-year-old. So I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about Jane's walk. And I also know we have a couple pictures that we're going to bring up, and then we'll ask questions with you and Dan in just a moment then.
So I was introduced to Jane's Walk probably about 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I was so excited because it is truly one of my favorite, easiest community engagement tools is to walk the streets with your neighbors based around some kind of topic. And so Jane's Walk started, I believe, in Toronto in 2007. And it started in Milwaukee before I got engaged. And I was just so enthusiastic. These are truly community member led walks. They're all volunteer led. And you can do a senior walk. You can do a walk about the art in your neighborhood. You can talk about nature. I have used Jane's Walk with our city Department of Public Works to do pre and post construction walks. And it's tough to get people to come out of their homes and talk about transportation. It doesn't seem so exciting. But when you engage with a walk, when you have it as a community welcoming event, I was able to talk about the streets and safety and walking and biking in a far easier way with a far more diverse population that didn't ever have a conversation about our public right of ways and streets. So it's usually every May. There are dozens of walks, cities across the country, across the world engage in Jane's Walks. It's typically in May. I think this year in Milwaukee, it's going to shift a little bit to the summer, just by the nature of the planning. There's some new direction happening. The Turners support Jane's Walk in Milwaukee. And so typically it's in May, but it's going to shift. And the theme, I believe, will be emergence. I think we're all ready to emerge out of our cocoons. And see our neighbors again and be outside where it is fairly safe. And the city of Milwaukee is kind of emerging at the same time. So I think there's a great theme there coming up this year.
Great. And Kate, if people are looking for additional information, because once again, this might be the first time they hear about Jane's Walk, where could they go?
There's a website and a Facebook page for Jane's Walk MKE. And I would bet that if you were looking in your own city, around the state, you would find them. And if you don't see one, start it. Start one walk in your community on whatever theme, whatever reason you want to. I've seen literacy walks. There is so much that we can engage in, and there's something so beautiful about simply taking a walk with our neighbors.
Absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of similar to what AARP has for livable communities, which is a walk audit. And I had the pleasure of doing that with the village of Shorewood about 2 years ago, so January of 2020, when it was winter, because I remember. And it was just interesting to walk with the residents. And we also looked at, are the sidewalks shoveled? How far, can we get across the street in the time allotted? And so it's very eye-opening. So I love the essence behind Jane's Walk, not only just to get people talking, but it being meaningful.
Yeah, it's a moment to stop, look, and listen. And I like that about walking and biking in general. Or paddling the beautiful rivers we have in Milwaukee. You stop and listen, and that's the way we conducted our walks. We knew there were areas of tension around pedestrian crossings, bike lanes, car speed, that kind of thing, and we simply just stopped and listened. I didn't talk a whole lot. It was more of an observation, and then we had moments to pause inside a park and chat about what we saw. And then I had picked other select areas. If you're on a trail, how quiet it is, how many birds you can hear. So we would just walk and pause, and then chat. And it's amazing what you can garner from simply taking the time.
To listen. Absolutely. So why don't we bring Dan back, and we'll ask a couple question. So Dan, I'll start with you. I know I kind of framed out livable communities, and the formula for what makes a community livable isn't particularly complex. Especially if we give the elevator speech about a community kind of being livable for all. So for most part, the features and needs are fairly simple, and it might be also because we kind of live it and breathe it. In a livable community, people of all ages could go for a walk, they could cross the street, ride a bike, as we were talking. So Dan, can you tell us how Jane Jacobs would respond to this when we're talking about livable communities? And in a perfect world, every community would be viewed that way. What do you think her take is?
Oh gosh, I think she would love for every community to follow the same model that AARP is doing with livable communities. I think it's truly about getting people to feel comfortable building relationships, being active, being seen, and being able to connect. I mean, it really goes back to building social capital and all the basics like that. So.
And Dan, if somebody, once again, this might be the first time they hear of Jane Jacobs, what is some additional resources that they can look into to learn more about her? What would you recommend?
There's a lot of great websites out there. If you want to just read a short article, I think that's a good place to start. If you want to really dive in, the book Death and Life of Great American Cities is definitely her most probably nominal or her most important work. It's a little hard to read at times because it's a little bit fanciful an idea, but I think that there's the basic core tenets of building great places is there.
And Kate, back to Jane's Walk, I know you stated they're all over the US and even the world, and you and I are in Milwaukee, so it's upcoming. How could somebody, if they don't have it in their neighborhood, do they go onto the website to register if they want to do one in their own area?
Yeah, I believe so. I was just in a planning meeting last night, and I'm not typically on the broader planning side. I just raise my hand to lead walks, and it's so fun. It's really
Yeah.
so easy.
Yeah.
And I believe the website will be collecting and responding. On Facebook especially, they're very responsive. And so if you have an idea, start thinking of it now. And I think they are going to go into June, so we've got some time. But we only have Jane's Walks in Milwaukee because the community raises their hand to lead a walk.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So this is kind of planting the seed of, if you are viewing this, we have viewers from all around Wisconsin. This could be a really great opportunity for maybe to have them also do this in their neighborhood. And it's, as we all know, COVID has been lingering for some time now, and what a great way to get out, meet new people, get people talking, and start looking at your community maybe in a different lens that maybe you did it even 2 years ago or 20 years ago. And Dan, what would you say as if somebody's watching this again, why do you think that Jane Jacobs would make it, how can I say this, for this month being Women's History Month, why do you think she's the best candidate for us to talk about for this month?
Well, gosh, I think Jane is often considered the mother of good urbanism. So, and it's just because of her style, her ideas, but really it comes from observing. Sometimes we forget that part of what it takes to build community, and that's just observing the way people interact and the way they use the space they're in, or even the place that they love.
And Kate, what are some words that you would tell somebody who's also looking at easy kind of ways that they can connect within their community besides Jane Walk? What else would you recommend them to do?
Oh gosh, you kind of open up a whole new category there. You can kind of take the principle of Jane's Walk, is that having conversations are really important. I do love big plans, but I love big plans that start with small community, even a two-person conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you said the word social capital. And I think that if you have some social capital, we all do, start there. What concerns you? Have a different conversation. Go for a walk with someone you've never taken a walk with before, and look around you. Are there kids on the playground?
Mm-hmm.
Does crossing that street feel safe? If you look at all the land that we have in our cities, how is it being used? What's private? What's public? Those are just things around you. And then I guess since I'm kind of coming from a sustainability side, it's where's the water going?
Mhm.
How much green space is there? Do the trees look healthy? Just asset assessment of what you have around you that we really do take for granted.
Yeah. And if we could pull up Arlene's comments. So Arlene just said, thank you for sharing this information. I was not familiar with Jane before. So I also want to echo that. So Dan and Kate, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Just once again, it's all about just planting the seed of people who did fabulous work and who still their legacy is still reaching us today. So I want to thank you both for joining us, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And if you are watching this in replay, we always encourage you to share this video on your social media. As always, we like to plug some upcoming events that might be of interest to you. So tonight at 6 p.m., get organized and declutter like a pro. I believe I should take that immediately. Monday, March 7th, Sustainable Living Green Spring Cleaning. Thursday, March 8th at 7 p.m., Movies for Grown-Ups screening The Pact. And then Thursday, March 10th, this is hosted by our friends up in Fox Valley Technical College. If you're interested in maybe opening or starting a business at the age of 50 plus, this is a great workshop for you. You can go below to register or call 1-877-926-8300. And of course, Small Dollar Big Impact, that is a monthly grant awarded to nonprofits, municipalities, and similar for really fun, great, out-of-the-box ideas that impact your local community. So if you're interested in applying for up to $1,000 grant, applications are due Tuesday, March 15th. You can find all the information, including the application, at aarp.org/WI and then SDBI, which stands for Small Dollar Big Impact. So for next week's show, we are going to have some special guests from Souls to the Polls MKE. So this is a local group in Milwaukee that helps get information out about voter education to residents. So we'd love for you to join us next Thursday at noon to learn more about what they are doing to impact the local community. So once again, I want to thank Kate and Dan so much to talk about Jane Jacobs' legacy. And thank you for joining. And we look forward to seeing you next Thursday. And until then,